Today I'm talking with David McKay, who is a friend of our church, Unity of the Triangle. And as always, it's a pleasure to talk to him because he's a wise guy, but also a fun guy. So it does sound like either a bad person or a non-plant or animal, but that's not really the case. This is one of the good people that you always would like to know, like to have as your friend. I'm going to let David tell you a little bit about his background, just so you have a sense of who he is. Many of you may know him. He's been at our church several times, spoken several times, done workshops, and we did a book study on his material. And as always, I think this will be an interesting conversation because he comes with such depth and is such an engaging person. So please welcome David McKay. And David, if you will tell us a little bit about yourself, we'll start with that.
Happy to. Thanks, Newsom. It's really great to be here. Well, an essential piece of information, I think, is that I trained as a Zen Buddhist monk for 18 years at a monastery in California. It's a very strict traditional practice in a lot of ways. I lived in silence and just meditation, working meditation, eating meditation, pretty much all day long, every day for 18 years. And it was non-traditional in the sense that what my teacher offered and taught us is a way of combining an ancient Buddhist understanding and practice with modern psychological tools. And so that's what I incorporated, and it's a sort of technology that I learned to carry. And I left the monastery about a little over 6 years ago now, and I am now essentially living the same way in a lot of ways. I live somewhat of a monastic life, but in the world, and I am working to continue to support awareness practice with people in the form of retreats and workshops. There's online groups that we meditate in the morning and so on. So for myself personally, practice is and continues to be, the absolute center part of my life and what my life is all about. And I'm practicing in new ways now out here in the world, and in ways also that help me to continue to grow in my own journey.
Yeah, David, I'm sure that your practice continues. I don't see how you could drop it completely, having been so immersed in it for so long. And most of us haven't been that immersed in it. So somewhere along here, along the line, I'm going to ask you to help us with some practices that we could do here in the world. But let me start by asking you, what is the nature of mind as you see it or as your training has told you? And maybe you could just bring some clarity to what is Buddha mind?
Well, when people talk about Buddha mind, what they're talking about is the mind that is uncontaminated, you might say, by the social conditioning that we've received. I use the phrase conditioned mind, this is the other side of it, to describe sort of like what happens outside of Buddha mind, you might say, or instead of Buddha mind. In conditioned mind, we are assuming a self that is separate from everything and that is supposed to be in control of life, that has preferences and opinions about things, has a history, and all of that. And so there's an illusion of a self that's created through our social conditioning, through what we're taught to believe, basically, starting when we were little kids. There's a self that gets created that's outside of life as it's just unfolding. When people talk about Buddha mind, at least this is the way I see it, what we're talking about is the mind that is not that. And it's easier to talk about what it isn't than what it is, because, it's when we get into what it is, there really isn't a way of talking about it because it just is. But you might say it's the mind that a human being can channel that is the same as life unfolding, essentially.
Could you say that again? The same as life is unfolding is the Buddha mind. Does that?
Yeah. So let me say that another way. So a typically Buddhist way of looking at reality is that it's all mind. It's all intelligence, and the intelligence happens to be embodied in all these different forms. So there's like a human form, but also like a tree or a rock or a bird or whatever. From a Buddhist point of view, that's all mind operating. And we live inside of that. And we have these bodies. Part of the mystery, I think, of being a human being is that we have a body, we have an individual perspective. So we look at the world from a particular individual point of view. And yet the mind that we experience, and we call my mind, is the same as the mind that is causing everything to be. And so when the Buddha mind is that. It's when there isn't any difference between my mind that's functioning and the mind that is sort of functioning, you might say, to create everything and cause everything to be.
That's a very similar to what the unity perspective is. Charles Fillmore, one of the founders of Unity, used to use mind as a substitute for the word God, and this idea that we share the same intelligence as the divine is common to both our belief structures, I suppose. And so we have this commonality, but I will say something about the Buddhist tradition. It's been at it so long. I think it has a lot of technologies to get access to that clarity of mind. If we were to say that the Buddha mind was the witness, would that be a mistake?
It depends on what you mean by that, because you could like to say that that's awareness, definitely. If that's what you mean by witness. If what you mean is by somebody observing, then no. That's different, because the Buddha mind doesn't operate as a somebody. It's outside of a somebody. I don't know if that's the way to say it, outside of. It transcends a somebody. So, we go along, part of what we do when we're, confused, when we're in conditioned mind, is we imagine that we are a self who's observing things, evaluating, having interpretations of things, basically making stuff up that come out of things we're taught from the past and putting it on our current experience. So witness in that sense, I would say, that's a conditioned self. But in terms of pure, undifferentiated awareness, it's like the awareness that this sort of includes all of the experience, then if that's what you mean, then yeah, absolutely.
And how do you know when you're in one or the other?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, that's the tricky thing. To me, that's a lot of what practice is answering that question, basically, because it's really subtle. And also we're taught from, almost the very beginning of our lives that who we are is this conditioned self. And so it's really difficult to step back enough to see that, the beliefs and assumptions that I carry, the way that I perceive the world as a self is not real. It's very difficult to see that. And we tend to assume that everything that we experience is real, everything is me. And so it takes a lot of work and paying attention over time to see the difference between a mind that's functioning as a self and a mind that is functioning beyond a self. But the short answer to that is, if I'm a self, I suffer, which is really essentially a Buddhist technical word for I am outside of life. But what I'm going to experience there is, on a fundamental level, my life isn't going to work. I'm going to feel separate from things. There's going to be dysfunction and sabotage happening. There's going to be a confusion that's happening. I'm going to be swept away in my emotional states all the time, and I'll be without, the experience of being in the Buddha mind. There's a flow that goes with it. Things tend to work. Things tend to line up in front of me like that. And so there's kind of a felt sense of it, but really it's just the work of seeing where I am, seeing what the result is of the thinking that's going on, and seeing if that takes me to a place of connection with everything that is, or if it takes me to a place of separation and division.
You said there was a felt sense. Do you get a sense from when you're in the Buddha mind or the clarity of mind, that is there a feeling state that you could identify so you don't have to wait for an outcome to know you're in it?
Well, there is. It gets tricky, though, because part of the complexity around all this, and also part of, I think, what makes it interesting, is you can't know something like that. Like you can't know in this kind of a way. Like I can't know that I'm centered. I can't know that I am in awareness and that I am in Buddha mind. Because the kind of knowing, like this kind of knowing, doesn't understand that. And so there's no way that I can say for sure to myself, okay, yeah, I'm here, I'm present, I'm centered, I'm in awareness. And at the same time, there is this felt sense. So for me, it's just, there's this, it's an energy. There's an energy, there's a movement that's happening. I can feel the connection that's going on. I can feel I can feel the guidance that is happening, because when we're present and aware and in Buddha mind, there's a sort of direction life is taking, and I can feel that direction. So it's like it's that, but I can't actually go to that feeling and say, well, I know that I'm here, that I'm present.
That's tricky, isn't it? I can do.
It's very tricky. Well, and it's part of what makes it fun and interesting, I think. I mean, I love spiritual practice, and part of it is this. It's just this great mystery. And another way I really like to look at it is, what life is about is it's this big game, and the game is to find, who am I really? In the middle of all the complex, sensations and perceptions that are happening, all the experiences that are happening, there is a me. There's a real me in the middle of that. Who is that? Where is that? And that's kind of the game we play. And we play the game in, everything that we do, from, I'm eating a meal to I'm talking with somebody, I'm in a work situation, I'm in a relationship situation. All of those are places where I can practice seeing into, who I am really, and discovering what that is. So from a certain point of view, it's kind of frustrating, because I just kind of want to know. But from another point of view, it's a mystery, and a really alluring mystery that really doesn't have a final answer. It's more of like I want to do it. I want to do that looking, because it just takes me deeper and deeper into my experience. And at least in terms of my experience so far, there really is no end to that.
Something you just said, there's a me at the center of this, is when we were talking earlier, you talked about there's one mind for all of existence, and then we are part of that. So how do you bracket the me within that one mind?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a confusion that happens in this around the teachings, I think. It's some place I was confused actually for a really long time myself, because people will take the idea that there is no self, no separate self, which is, you might say the fundamental teaching of the Buddha, and extrapolate from that and say, well, then there is no me. There's no nothing here that I can call me. But in reality, at least this has been my experience, when I let go of the conditioned self, like what I was talking about before, this idea of who I am that is built out of all these false assumptions about things, there is something that I can call me. Like a lot of times I'll call it like authentic nature or authentic self. There is something that's me, and it's completely unique. It's only mine. I'm the only one who's ever experienced it. And yet, and this is part of the mystery, and yet simultaneously, it is also absolutely the same as life as it's unfolding. And that's the great mystery, I think, that we get to explore through spiritual practices. If that seems impossible, like from a logical point of view, that seems impossible that you could be an individual and also universal at the same time. But that is, at least in my experience, that is the case. And part of the kind of the joy and the fun of spiritual practice is exploring into that. It's not something we can understand intellectually, but it's something we can experience.
Yeah, I think the analogy of the wave and the ocean comes to mind. Is that essentially something, an analogy you'd use?
Yeah, that's a good one, I think. Yeah, I really like that analogy a lot. Mm-hmm.
And so the benefits of being not in the conditioned mind, it seems like there's more peace, as you were saying before, but why would we go through all the effort?
I know. Yeah, I've asked myself many, many times, as you can imagine. Well, for me, it's two things. There's kind of like a negative side of that and a positive side. On the negative side, I don't have to suffer. I don't have to, along with conditioned mind comes all of this unhappy stuff. I mean, really all of the unhappy stuff that we experience as human beings comes from believing in the reality of conditioned mind. Stuff like, I'm not a good enough person. I'm not meeting the standards and expectations that I feel like I need to meet in order to feel like I'm okay. There's a separation and a loneliness. And there's also all kinds of dysfunction, self-sabotage, all kinds of that stuff like that. Even somebody who's on the other side who maybe is outwardly successful a lot of times is doing that in order to compensate for perceived, flaws, perceived, things that they believe that is wrong with them, which are completely false. And so if I let go of conditioned mind, I don't have to live in a world where there's something wrong with me in potential. And I don't have to try to compensate for my imagined flaws. I don't have to try to, overcompensate by, whatever, doing things right or being successful or, meeting some kind of standards and expectations. I just get to be me. And on the other side, on the positive side, outside of conditioned mind, life gets super easy because it's all taken care of itself. Like I don't have to be in charge of it. I just have to be willing to show up and essentially do what is being put in front of me. And it's been very much my experience in my life, especially since leaving the monastery, where I've got on my own and needing to make my own decisions, just seeing how perfectly life will take care of me and how just step by step, it will be clear the direction to go if I'm not involved with conditioned mind and not trying to control things and doubting everything that's happening.
Yeah, I think that's it's the flow state is another way of people have talked about it, perhaps. And I am sometimes struck by this futility, I think, of getting this and holding on to it. It's like once we try to hold on to it, we lose it. It seems like getting in there and staying in there is, I'm not sure what it's analogous to that we could easily say, but somehow surfing this awareness without owning it too much, that we then begin to clamp down and say, I want it to continue this way, and I want it to be just like it was just a moment ago, and then it's gone.
Yeah, it doesn't work. And of course, the reason is because that's a self having that perspective and having that desire. And the self is the entire problem. Whenever we become a self like that, then we have removed ourselves from just the unfolding of life, like the flow state, like you're saying, and then we're outside of it. And so it's part of, part of what's tricky is, practice will inevitably carry a person into a place where they're experiencing the oneness. And then, that's often kind of the next thing that happens is, and then suddenly, I like this. I want this. Let's try to make this happen. And now I've become a self, and now I've removed myself from life too. Yeah. The other thing about it also that's implied in what you're saying is it's not an intellectual process. It's not something you can know, even though, the way we're talking about it right now sort of makes it sound like it is in some ways, but it isn't. You can't know it. You can't, you can't get there by understanding anything. You have to get there by just allowing the experience to happen.
Yeah. I think we'll come back to that when we go to practice, but I want to make a comment here. I was talking with someone who was during this time of being in COVID and semi-isolation, a sense of sadness was coming up, a real grief. He was, finding himself in tears. And at the same time, he was a pretty successful person, had accomplished a lot. And what seemed to me be the case was that his very accomplishments were really there to cover over this initial missing, this initial lack that he felt. And therefore, even as he's done it, it could not be satisfying enough when he couldn't practice being competent. Being himself was distressing.
Right. Yeah, very much my experience too as I work with people. Yeah. We have a fundamental need, I think, as you say, to be ourselves, to have the space, you might say, or to be allowed to be who we truly are. And when we're not there, it's frightening. And we're also disconnected with the source of everything that can meet our needs, which is call it life or God, call it mind. That's the source of what we most intimately need in ourselves. And if we've bought the the imaginary standards and expectations of society, which we all have at some point, and we haven't recovered from that, and we haven't seen into that, then we're going to end up being in this separate place and being without what we most intimately need. And then, that's what most people do. It's like, okay, well, I need some way to compensate for that. And really what it is, I need some way to distract myself from this existential distress that comes from not being who I really am, or at least imagining that I'm not who I really am, imagining that I'm this self who has these, perceived flaws and all that kind of stuff I was talking about before. And so, unfortunately, I think that's a lot of what people do, is spend their lives trying to distract themselves. A lot of people try to compensate that by success or accumulation of, money or goods or that kind of thing. And it just doesn't work.
Yeah, which brings us back to the nature of suffering. And it's been my experience in doing Buddhist meditation retreats. There is a bit of suffering that goes on inside the retreat. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because that's another point that people often get confused about. That word suffering, I wish we had a better word for it, but I haven't found a better word to use. What's really being pointed at there, as I said earlier, is what suffering is being caught in the illusion of a separate self. It's not suffering in the way that we use that word more like in a worldly way. Often what people mean by suffering is essentially pain. You're going through pain. Like if I have, I've broken my arm or something, and then I'm having pain, I'm suffering over that. And that word does mean that in a common context, but that's not what's meant by that from a Buddhist point of view. So like you come on retreat, there's, a couple kinds of suffering that would happen. There's the, maybe there's a lot of sitting going on, so the body hurts, that kind of thing. That's not a Buddhist form of suffering. But if conditioned mind is resisting what's happening, which often tends to happen on retreat, and is fighting the fact that there's no distraction, is trying to keep a person from, really sinking into just the experience of the moment, then that would be a Buddhist sort of suffering. So in other words, the suffering in the way that a Buddhist means it is, just to say it a different way, is being involved with conditioned mind, being inside of conditioned mind, not being able to see your way out of it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do some practice. Let's talk about some practices that we can do to get outside this conditioned mind, or to renew ourselves in some way.
Okay. Yeah. Well, here's traditionally there's two paths: the negative way and the positive way. We call it the via positiva and the via negativa. In terms of at least the practice that I do and the work that I do with people. The negative way is mostly what we talk about because it's the easiest one to talk about. In the negative way, basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to see everything that is not authentic. So everything that is not truly me, and let that go. And then what remains is me. So that's the negative way. And there's a lot of different kind of practices that help with that. And that's a lot of what I do with people. There's a set of tools that practice offers that allows people to get into conditioned mind, take it all apart, almost like a mechanic using, like tools, like mechanicking tools. Take it all apart so you can see what's really there and let it go. One that is, perhaps the most fundamental is just to watch your thoughts and recognize that almost all of what's going on for a typical person, almost all of what's going on in their mind is not me thinking. It's actually conditioned mind talking to them. Now that's just a way of looking at it. That's not actually true in a certain way, but it's a way of looking at it. But to observe your thoughts and realize that, okay, most of this stuff is coming out of my past. I'm being talked into believing what I was taught to believe starting when I was like 2. And that is the beginning of the process of creating a separate self. So just being able to see that, to see the thinking and see it as conditioned mind can help a person step out of conditioned mind into a place of presence and awareness and see what's happening there. So that's on the negative side. And there's lots more that we get into if we had time about like how to work with all of that. on the positive side, it gets a lot more simple. It's just being here. Is bringing the attention to the moment. The attention wanders away, bring it back to the moment. Feeling into, what is it to be here? Looking for the guidance that's here, as I was talking about before. Just being present and open to the experience that's happening right now, without any of that thinking, without any of those psychological tools.
Yeah, it's a very interesting contrast, the via negativa, via positiva. The positive way is essentially a unity's way, which basically says it tries to do correctives for the sense of the things that we feel like we're missing. It says, you're basically saying you're good, you're a divine being, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have really focused a lot on affirmations in Unity as a way of training ourselves to feel complete. However, I do recognize that one of the things that is missing when you do that is that you're still in conversation. It's always the conversation you're in. Do you know what I mean? It's just either it's a nicer conversation or an unpleasant conversation with yourself. And getting down to pure simplicity, while that is a piece of the Unity philosophy of meditation and coming into the silence, as we call it, it isn't always as clear that everything we're hearing, or almost everything we're hearing, is just commentary by a program.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'm really with you. I mean, all that's really good stuff that you were saying on the positive side, and at least in my experience, I mean, it's pretty much inconceivable to me that someone can be truly free without also doing the process work on the other side, because it's so deceptive and subtle. And there's a way that it happens. There is a very concrete way in which we are made to imagine that we are outside of life, and that there's something wrong with us and all the stuff that goes with conditioned mind. If we can't see how that's happening, it's really difficult to step out of it. And a person could be doing all those practices on a positive way, and I had this experience in myself plenty, without realizing there being a self doing it. Like, for example, with some kind of agenda. I'm trying to be to have a certain experience, instead of having the experience that is actually here. I'm trying to compensate for something, as we were talking about earlier, something like that. And so that's what I love about practice and about the practice that I was given, is because it does offer both those sides of it, and they complement each other. And, on the negative side, the process stuff really helps me to be able to be here and be present. And the practice of simply being present really helps me to be in a place where I can see all the stuff on the conditioned side. So it works perfectly together.
Well, David, I wish we had more time. We are planning on having a question and answer period. And so when we do that on Thursday night, I'm looking forward to having you there again. Maybe you can answer some more, and we can talk more at that time about practice and or the subtleties of this, so that we might get a clear feeling from the questions that people are asking us of what we need, what you need to tell us, so that we can get there more easily. Granted, it is a lifelong process, but
Right. Yeah, that sounds excellent. I really look forward to that. It sounds like a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for joining us today. I think you are a font of wisdom, but really, there's one more thing that I should say about you, is that everything I've ever heard you say has come from the heart, and is spoken with such assurance and yet such humility that I find it quite refreshing to be with you. So thank you very much.
Mm.